Thank you for joining us. The webinar will begin shortly.
If you could imagine a solution to all your compliance problems, what would it look like? At Ethico, we've got you covered. Ethico helps ethics and compliance professionals tackle any issue that heads their way, from workplace investigations to case management to sanction screening. Get more connected to your workforce than ever before with our next-gen solutions, allowing you to see key risk areas before they turn into burning fires. Our case management software offers a variety of configurable workflows and automated processes, making sure the right person gets the right data at the right time. Our in-house hotline risk specialists undergo over 160 hours of training to make sure you get more information on the front end. Serving over 7 million employees worldwide, Ethico helps to make our world a better workplace, one company at a time. Visit ethico.com to learn more.
If you have any questions, please use the Q&A section and we'll try to answer your questions in the order we receive them. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to today's episode of Alchemizing HR Navigating What's Next. Our topic, measuring the human delta. If you are a returning friend and guest, it's wonderful to see you again. And if you are a new friend, welcome to our community of learning. If we haven't met already, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Clarissa Peterson. I'll be your host for today's session. I'm a former Chief HR and Ethics Officer, and I've had the privilege of working on every continent with the exception of Antarctica. Never say never, I may make it there one day. I'm also the proud holder of the GPHR, the SPHR, and the leading professional in ethics and compliance certifications, and a past chair of the board of directors of HRCI. Today, I'm president and CEO of Ohana HR. Our team of executive coaches works with companies to help leaders maximize their impact to the organizations they serve. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First of all, we know you get up early and stay up late to learn with us here at HRCI, and for that, we are so grateful. Don't forget to put your whereabouts, your location in the chat so I can be sure to share that with our speaker a little later. And also, it's very important for us to make sure that Alchemizing HR is accessible to all. In that vein, we have a closed captioning service. If that's not a service you require, just look at the bottom of your screen to click on the Show Captions button for further information. So now to introduce today's amazing speaker, Matthew Cahill. Matthew Cahill is a dynamic leader at the forefront of organizational development and cultural transformation. With a wealth of experience spanning over a decade, he has dedicated his career to enhancing workplace dynamics and fostering inclusive environments. Matthew's expertise lies in aligning people, perceptions, and processes to move businesses from bias to belonging. His passion for cultivating deeper connections and inclusive leadership drives him to design innovative strategies that empower individuals and teams alike. Matthew is committed to empowering organizations to create psychologically safe spaces where people want to work. So without further delay, it gives me great honor to introduce today's speaker, Matthew Cahill. Matthew, take it away.
Thank you, Clarissa. It truly is an honor to be here today. I really appreciate this opportunity to share with you the latest development from the Principio company. That was a very gracious introduction. I am always a bit humbled when I hear the words that I wrote in introductions, but hearing them from you, Clarissa, it really does mean a lot. And I appreciated our little time before the meeting started. And in that spirit of that pre-work meeting, I want to invite everyone that is here today, and I really appreciate seeing the breadth in the chat of where people are joining from. And as you get settled in for this webinar, you are most likely leaving something behind, right? Hopefully you're not just playing this and then doing email and trying to do other work and caving to that temptation of this 21st century work world. And to help just recalibrate everyone and to try to get a focus what I'm going to do is offer you a mindful moment. And I'm going to do what I affectionately call hijacking your screens, and just invite you to take a few moments, just to take 30 seconds and just focus on your breathing. Close out other windows, put your phone out of arm's reach. And just breathe. And just breathe. Breathing is something that we do automatically, and we only notice it when we're short of it. It's kind of like compensation in an HR world. Thank you for indulging me that. I did ask Joe to put into the chat a link to that meditation bowl. It is yours to bookmark and use whenever you need it. And if you work in this modern era, in this digital age, I would suggest that you use it often. I saw awesome pop up in the chat. And just whenever you need to recharge your batteries throughout your day, whenever you need something that just kind of breaks up the monotony, sometimes it can get the creative juices flowing just to take 15, 30, 45, or 60 seconds, whatever you need. If you need more than that, take it. But that's just a tool that you can begin using immediately. So with that said, what are we here to discuss today? Today, we're here to learn about the human delta. And what I'd like to do is offer you a reflection on the evolving nature of work itself, right? We've evolved from a primarily agrarian economy and work 150 years ago or so into, we evolved into an industrial age in the 19th and early 20th centuries, where much of the work was around manufacturing and factories. It was still grounded in physical labor. But as the industrial age evolved, as technology evolved, in the late 20th and early 21st century, we started calling and referring to ourselves as being in our culture as being an information age, or a digital age is what it's sometimes referred to. And work in this digital age is very, very different, right? It's very, very taxing. It's very, very emotionally draining. It's very, very cognitively draining. And simultaneously, we're thrust into these use of different tools to facilitate and to automate a lot of our work processes. And what I'd like to offer you, what I want to invite you is to now look forward a little bit and think about, what are we going into? And for some of you, that may strike a chord of fear, but I want to offer you a framing, an umbrella, a conceptual model that might be useful in this relatively new era. I believe it can be referred to as the relational era. And what I mean by that, the relational era, it not only focuses on the transactional aspects of work, whatever industry you're in, but in order to be successful in that industry, you need to foster connections, collaboration, and commerce. And this is a different language. These are different lenses that I'm going to offer you today to look through the nature of work today, and most importantly, how we go about doing it. And so some of you I saw did take the human delta ahead of time. This is a very brief, very concise 20-statement assessment. But what I want to do is a quick quiz. This is all still part of the priming and the icebreaker effect. How many of you, actually, Joe, can you put that poll up? There it is. There it is. So now we're going to get really calibrated cognitively. We did emotionally by doing the mindful moment. Now I want to get calibrated cognitively and draw our attention and focus on this polling question. What is the human delta? Please do take your best guess. For some of you that did take it ahead of time, you will know have a high probability of getting the correct answer. But it reads, what is the human delta? An innovative way to move HR to the center of strategic conversations. 20 statement assessment written by and for HR professionals. A way to measure the gap between how work gets done and how we think work gets done. So, Joe, can we maybe give a countdown? Oh, never mind. We'll do a countdown. Just do the poll. That's beautiful. Beautiful. I love this. I love this. I love this. I love this. All of the answers are correct. The most correct answer is all of the above, but you can give yourself a point if you're keeping score and you are one of those types of personalities that's really, kind of uber competitive. I think it's been conditioning by, the current education system. But if you are that, you won. You got the point. Give yourself a point. We're going to close that out. If you didn't take the human delta assessment and you are looking to, you can scan that QR code, or I can put another link in the chat. And I need to do this with a bit of a explanation, because the link that some of you took was to the demo site, and it had an appended ID on it. So your results they're not stored anywhere. That's a demo system. That was just for you to test and see what this is all about and experience it for yourself. But your results are calibrated with every other person that has participated in the human delta since I launched it in late 2024. And where you score is listed out in the chart that you're seeing on the screen now. So in a highly functioning, healthy organization, you're going to score somewhere between 0 and 35. As you score higher and higher, you're going and trending towards dysfunction and layers of toxicity. So what these are indicators of cultural health. Now, what I'm doing here is going into some slippery territory. When I hear words like culture and even health, it's imperative that we have a common understanding of what we're talking about. The word culture could be referred to as a work culture. It could be your country culture. It could be any number of different definitions that might be your immediate association. And this is an area that I think causes a lot of problems in our modern workplace, right? Where much of the work we're in the knowledge workforce, right? We're using our brains. We need to make sure that we level set on what it is that we're talking about. And the human delta is an opportunity for you to use the results of this assessment to really bring the conversations internally, the strategic conversations internally, to focus on humans, put humans at the center of the organization, which is imperative in this relational era that we find ourselves in. So the assumption I had before this meeting, when I was doing a little prep in preparation for this webinar, is that most of you, this might not be all of you, most of you have a seat at the table, right? The table, meaning the table where decisions are being made in your organization. If you don't have that, the human delta is a way for you to get yourself a seat at the table. The human delta was written for HR people by HR professionals. So one of the first things that we need to do is calibrate. Do we even have the same level of understanding about what the role of HR is in our business? And to do that, I borrowed the HR maturity level. And if you're not familiar with the HR maturity level, it's just a framework that illustrates where a business may or may not be in terms of their HR function in the business. And so there are different versions of these levels. But I think what I did here was my best to capture the essence of each level. And your organization, how you answer this may be different than how your executives answer this. And what the human delta assessment does is give you a mechanism to capture that delta, right? If you have senior leadership that think their organization has HR a seat at the strategic leadership table, it may be very different than what you see it as if it's at basic compliance. So some of you have responded to this already. I'd like for everybody to respond to it now. Thank you, Joe, for putting that up. And just put where you think your organization is, where you think it is, not necessarily where your executives think it is, because that's an exercise that needs to be done internally on a real assessment, not the demo system, right? So here, I just want to give a sample of where this audience is at, so I can start to further tailor this session for you collectively the best that I can. So let's give it another countdown, maybe 5, 4, 3. Please do fill in your response, a 2 and a 1. And let's see what we have here. Oh, wow. Wow, look at this. Look at this audience. It's all over the place. I love to see this because now we have a representative sample of HR across all industries, all businesses, all size businesses. Because the size of the business, there's often a correlation. I'm going to go ahead and close that poll, Joe. But I think what's a general pattern, regardless of where you think your organization is at, when you are at a more basic level of compliance, running payroll, doing transactional things as your primary core responsibility, the HR function tends to be a lot more reactive, right? So it's very much reactive. When you get a more mature level of a human resource as a function within an organization, you are afforded this opportunity to be more proactive. And when you have the delta present itself, as I'm seeing in the chat, some of you are putting in there that business or leadership, sees HR as just transactional, just go, make sure payroll is run. But they may think of it as being strategic leadership. Now we have a delta that we need to close. So some of the indicators that I encourage people to look for and ask yourself, or do you have budget for programming? If you are at the strategic leadership level, you have budget for content and programming. You're able to remove barriers for your mid-level managers to actually lead their people. You're able to coach more than direct. You have conversations that continue when you enter the room. They don't just shut down. You're not perceived as the HR police. You are able to spend more time being proactive and less time cleaning up other people's messes, right? Or perhaps your organization, your HR function is just a revolving door of complaints. Right? So I think these are better indicators as to where your maturity level is, and the human delta gives you an opportunity to weave them in to the conversation with executives. So why is this important now? I'm already seeing in the chat, and you're seeing it, you're feeling it, you're living it. Part of it is due to the changing conditions that we find ourselves in. We're in this information age, moving into the relational era, and we've optimized just about everything there is to optimize. We've automated most things that we can automate. And this is going to continue. Generative AI tools are only going to accelerate the automation of cognitive tasks. These things that were previously reserved for humans to do, it's now we're going to see those things being automated as well. So what does that leave us with? Well, my contention is that work today is much more collaborative and relational. It really is a fascinating fact to step back and look that this is we are now in the first time in the history of work to have 2, 3, sometimes 5 different named generations of people all huddling around a table, trying to collaborate and solve problems together. The currency that's used within today's workplace is human capital, is social capital. Your network at work is directly correlated with how productive you can be, or your net worth, right? And I think we are now moving into the relational era, and the indicator is, this is for all the Simon Sinek followers of the world, in the relational era, the why is still important. It's the baseline, but the how matters more than the who, what, where, when, and the why. Those are table stakes. But the how is what I want to draw your attention to right now. The how work gets done, how you design your meetings, what protocols do you put in, even for weekly stand-ups? How do you engage your employees? How do you lead? How do you prepare for executive briefings, for team meetings? How do you prioritize what to focus your attention on? How do you have tough conversations? How do you de-escalate situations? How do you handle conflict? How do you handle people who are conflict averse? How do you handle uncertainty? And this is a critical one in today's world. How do you discern truth from fiction? How do you even know what's real? So what I want to offer you is a conceptual model that was born out of my 15 years of work with HR leaders. This conceptual model is, I refer to it as the bias ecosystem. And you can look at this as a conceptual model for your business. With this model, we start out in this realm of thought, right? We are in this knowledge era, right? That we're moving into the relationship era, but the digital age, the information age is all about our thinking and our ideas. And the way our brains are wired, they're wired to have bias be a byproduct of our beliefs, our values, and our thoughts. And these biases, and there's over 200 different named cognitive biases that are born out of this interdisciplinary study of neuroscience, psychology, evolutionary biology. These biases get borne out and then often determine our actions. We don't like to think of it that way, but what's going on under the hood in our unconscious mind is a bigger driver of actions and behaviors than what happens in our conscious mind. In fact, some of the latest research is coming to the conclusion that human beings are not even rational creatures at all. We collectively are actually irrational creatures who really enjoy rationalizing our behavior. And that's a key distinction for understanding how the human resource functions in a workplace. Because it's these actions and behaviors that we can start to write policies and procedures for, right? It's the actions and behaviors that over time, and in most cases, this is organic over time, they become the very systems that we do work around, right? So the actions and behaviors over time in this ecosystem, this is how bias moves from the realm of these social constructs over into our systems in our institutions. So separating these areas is critical, because often confusion is brought about when we're focused on one type, and what's really the problem is one of the other types. And so what I want to offer you is an application of the bias ecosystem, and then I'm going to go into some of the statements that I think are most relevant for everybody here today. An easy application of the bias ecosystem is how our brains perceive reality, right? From the moment we're brought into this world, we kind of accumulate our knowledge as we go about life. We create these immediate associations with the world around us. And these associations are just the fabric of our perceptions, how we see the world. These associations, 99% of the time, are helpful. Well, maybe not 99, most of the time they're helpful. When they're not is when they start to form stereotypes. where you have one association with one type of person, place, or thing, and that becomes the only association with that person, place, or thing. And then that only association over time develops a stigma. And once a stereotype, and this could be stereotypes not just about gender, race, culture, and age, these could be stereotypes about HR and its function within the organization. Could be stereotypes related to sales, could be stereotypes related to management versus labor or union. If you have a union shop, there's all sorts of stereotypes that are less than productive because a stereotype only tells one sliver of a bigger story. And when that one sliver is dominant, a stigma is often the byproduct of that. And once a stereotype has a stigma, then new associations are created along with it, which just perpetuate a vicious cycle for the ecosystem rather than a virtuous cycle for the ecosystem. And some of this language about virtuous and vicious, I need to give credit to Kim Scott, who wrote a book called Radical Candor, and her sequel to that is even better, called Radical Respect. I have no affiliation with her. It's just beautiful, beautiful work, and I highly recommend that you check those out if this conceptual model is resonating with you. Another application of the bias ecosystem that I want to walk you through, because I think this will really ground it home as to how relevant this conceptual model is in our modern era, is to think about where you live as a form of bias. I live in San Francisco, California. Just my saying that is going to create some associations in your mind about who I am and what I may or may not think and what I may or may not be my political leanings, right? But I'm here to tell you, in San Francisco, we who live in San Francisco live in an information bubble. And the longer we live in this bubble without getting outside of it, the more that bubble then becomes an echo chamber. And so what I'm describing to you are these concepts that are often thrown around in different contexts, but this is an accurate understanding of what they may be. So once you're in an information bubble for an extended period of time, it becomes that kind of echo chamber. This is amplified by the media that you consume, right? And that you are willingly exposing yourself to. And I think this is the leading contributing factor towards the polarization that we see in our world today. And so this bias ecosystem, I'm asking you just to apply it to the broader social context of our country and think of our country's culture as being mediated, right? Television, social media, technology are embroiled into American culture. They're part of our way of life. If you have a device that you carry with you on a daily basis, many people are now referring to this as an extension of their brain, right? But the studies now show that we spend more of our waking hours willingly giving our attention to this device or to screens and allowing those devices to shape how we think and how we act towards one another. So with that being said, I gave you a couple of examples of how the bias ecosystem can be used just to look as a lens to look at our world around us. Now I want to use that conceptual model to talk through just a few of these statements that were born out of the HR function. So this statement, I think, resonated a lot with folks that I saw in the chat. This statement, and I'd like let's use the chat on this one. Very, very intentional. And this is kind of fun because when you have this many people on a webinar, it's a way just to collectively take the pulse, which is why I have that little heart behind this. I would love for you to, in the chat, and when I count to 3, do this. Don't do it yet, but get ready. Just get your cursor in the chat. And we're going to do it just for 10 seconds. So it's not going to be distracting. People will always put stuff in the chat, but if you don't want it, you can turn the notification off. But I want to spend 10 seconds, 10 seconds. And I'd like for you to put into the chat how much of your time and it's on a 1 to 100, 100% of the time or 1% of your time, do you spend in your role as an HR leader cleaning up other people's messes? Oh, look at this go. Look at this go. Look at this go. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Wow. 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 We'll go for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Whew. Now, I think we need a mindful moment. I know I do. Oh, wow. Now, I recognize that this could vary by day, by week. Maybe it's seasonal for you. And the answer is based on how you perceive your work right now. But what these statements are designed to do, the results of these statements are designed so that you can start to see, are you aligned with your perception of your experience at work, right? So we can compare the answers of the HR team with the answers that are provided by people outside of HR and see if there's a delta, right? In order to change something, we actually have to name it. So if everybody else is not seeing you as performing figurative janitorial services, then there is the first step in the problem, right? And in the relational era, which we are in now, our inability to handle these kinds of misperceptions is really at the core of problem solving issues related to employee engagement, employee retention, employee productivity. And so it's imperative to be able to have a gateway that we can at least start the conversation to redefine the processes that we are using to get what's called work done. So when we look at this from an HR perspective, if we have a lot of other messes that are percolating onto our desk, one strategy is to try to empower the people who are percolating them in the first place. So we can, if this is the case, this is one use case, right? Where I worked with an organization who had just inexperienced or unskilled managers. And when I say unskilled, it doesn't mean that they didn't have great integrity. It didn't mean that they didn't have great experience in whatever it was that they were doing. But what they were lacking is the soft skills that are necessary for the 21st century workforce. So skills that are grounded in emotional intelligence, skills that are grounded in being able to hold and maintain a psychologically safe space, right? When you don't have those skills in place, you end up with unnecessary escalations. You end up with an increased number of formal complaints. And the idea here is that we can actually, if we are in a proactive state within our wider organization, we can actually teach managers and employees how to handle necessary conflict and turn that into a source of creativity and innovation, right? That doesn't happen overnight, but these are the skills that need to be named and identified and then developed internally so that we can move HR to the center and have a human-centered organization. One of the other questions that I thought was relevant for today, and I'm just doing a time check, is generative AI. This has been like a tsunami that's run over many organizations. And I think a great question right now, it's very prescient to ask right now, is does your company have clearly defined guidelines for using tools like generative AI? And so I want to take 5-10 seconds, do a yes or a no. Yes, yes or a no, yes or no. We're going to make it a binary question. It's probably a little more nuanced than that, but I'm seeing it right now. Yes or no, yes or no. It's all over the place. Some people do have, some people don't have it. That's a very, very accurate, very, very accurate of where we are right now. generative AI, it seems like every day there is something new that's happening, or it's either in a headline, or there's a lot of fear mongering, I think, that's fueling a lot of inaction. And I think for businesses today, what I'm suggesting might be a useful lens to look through is a level of intimidation or uncertainty that you have within your organization from both non-managers, managers, from within your own HR team, from the executive team. Like, what is that level and where is it? Because this is something that often flies beneath the surface and people won't own it, right? When people are feeling intimidated or uncertain, what ends up happening more often than not is you get rogue experimentation. You're going to get people who just are going to use it anyway, and then they're going to bring in something that you may or may not want within your organization. And that rogue experimentation leads to inefficiencies and risk. And so I think from a business perspective, it's a much better strategy to put what I call guardrails and guidelines. And using the bias ecosystem, we can simultaneously put together a user adoption plan so that we can have approved, secure instances, right? That if that's the level of security that your business needs, there are ways to do that. And simultaneously start to roll out best practices across the organization. What's happened in many cases with companies that aren't proactive is that a lot of mistakes end up getting made. And in many cases, the mistakes don't cost people a lot, but there have been reports. I mean, you already likely have seen it in the headlines where, it really boils down to improper governance, and there were no guardrails, and there were no guidelines, and things went haywire. So that's a vast oversimplification, but it reinforces the importance of having strategic decision making, right, from HR, because it affects everybody in the organization. These tools are already integrated into most email systems. If you're a Microsoft shop, Copilot's already baked into Word, it's baked into Outlook, it's baked into PowerPoint, it's an add-in, it's a plugin. There's so many ways that it's already kind of penetrated the tools that we're already using day in and day out. I share that just to create hopefully a sense of urgency, not to strike a chord of fear. It's best to get your guardrails and guidelines in place. Get them written into employee handbooks. Okay. The last sample that I want to take from the human delta assessment is one that's been a perennial problem for a lot of my clients right now. And it's a sort of a lingering effect of COVID, right? I refer to the time frame before March 2020 as the BC era, before COVID. So what I would like for you to do in the chat now is take 10 seconds to share in the chat whether or not your company, and therefore you, are struggling with how to manage a remote workforce, right? Have you been engaging in these questions about whether or not we need to bring everybody back, or how do we conduct business in a virtual world, right? Are these prescient issues in your workplace? And here we're getting a lot of differences, right? So this conversation, there isn't a silver bullet. Contrary to what's happening at certain levels of our government and organizations, and some big companies are requiring people back to the office 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. That may work for companies that have more cash than God. But I think for most businesses, it needs to be a little more nuanced than that. And what I've been suggesting is that the location that work actually gets done matters less when you really understand the nature of your work. And so what happens with this in some scenarios, and in one use case, they started using language like, we need to have a return to work policy. Well, this is flawed on two fronts. When you use the bias ecosystem to look at this, you're framing something as return to work. What does that mean you've been doing for the last 4 to 5 years? Not working? It's just implicitly biased that you would frame something that way. So step one is to just frame it correctly, right? We are going to explore more in-office work opportunities or things to be done. The guideline here is to really think through the nature of the work and allow that to determine where it gets done. Most employees in the United States of America have already become accustomed to having a level of agency, meaning they want to have a level of control over where and how they get their work done. Mandating behavior, right? Mandating that people go and do something, like to come into an office just to sit yourself in front of a screen and join people who aren't there, makes no sense at all. None. So mandates tend to generate more attrition in most contexts across the United States. And in some cases, right now, what we're witnessing is that's intended, right? They want the employees to leave. And so if that's the strategy, then mandates will do what are very, very likely to do what you want them to do. But what's really important here for this human delta conversation is to get alignment, right? Get alignment between what leadership is thinking and wanting, what is the impact, and what can we do to get those types of results, right? If we really want people back in, then let's design the nature of work to be more collaborative, right? Let's not do it as a binary construct of either or, but how can we use one? What can we do here to prepare ourselves for when we're going to be together in person, right? Moving out of that binary construct of this or that into more of a nuanced approach of how can we use one to best strengthen the other. Now, all of a sudden, we're using the strengths of the medium. There are some things that are better done virtually than in person. And then there's lots of things that are better done in person than virtually. But a key point that's overlooked is in our brains, in our memories, we don't necessarily differentiate where that work took place. How many times have any of you, all of you, met somebody and wondered in your, did I meet this person online? Was it in a square? Was it where in a work context, right? So much of our work is done back and forth that it starts to all blend together. So I think the more effective approach, the more healthy approach is to figure out how you can use these to best support one another. So I'm going to round it out by just talking through a few strategic areas, right? And the polling question here is what is the question? What strategic area can you add to your next senior management meeting? What strategic area, if any, right? Maybe it's none, maybe it's none of the above. But which strategic area can you add to your next senior management meeting? Could it be identifying inefficiencies? Could it be, and that's more of a procedural or process-based question. Could it be, how do we best create a culture of trust and continuous improvement? How do we integrate candid conversations and radical respect? How do we create guardrails and guidelines, right, for decision-making, for use of generative AI tools? How can we realign and close the delta between what leadership is seeing and what our employees are seeing? So I'm going to do a 5, 4, 3, 2, and a 1. Joe, let's see what our results are here. Oh, I love it. I'm immediately drawn to the negative. That's called negativity bias, which is none of the above. Only 6% of you are in no position to be able to have a strategic conversation in your next senior management meeting or in an upcoming senior management meeting. That's very, very reassuring, right? That's very promising. That's an indicator that we can move HR, the function of HR, to the center of the organization, the center of a conversation, and have your business be a human-centered organization. Tactically, there are 7 steps that you can do to decrease the delta right away. Without even doing a formal assessment, you can start using a common language for problem solving. And this goes into really being explicit, taking the extra time and effort and cognitive effort it takes up front to just establish a shared common language around the problem that we're looking to dissect. That seems simple, but too often it's glossed over, and we make these crazy assumptions that we're all speaking the same language. And more often than not, when there's a problem, that's a starting point. We're just not even speaking the same language. Prioritizing mental safety, psychological safety, listening more as leaders within the organization. Most of y'all in HR know the value of deep listening, really listening to what somebody is not saying as opposed to what they are saying, right? Disrupting the stereotypes early and often. The conceptual model, the bias ecosystem is a great tool for that. Offering training programs that teach, especially people who are leading other people in the organization, how do you have a space for difficult or sensitive conversations? The nature of work in the relationship era is that we all operate at the intersection of personal and professional. One thing that COVID did, living through a global pandemic, is it stripped away our ability to compartmentalize. Like, oh, I'm at work, I am not at work. And we really show up how we show up, and one is so tightly coupled with the other, right? We need to have better skills at just supporting one another through personal and professional hard times. Cross-generational mentorship programs, that's a low-hanging fruit. I think it's an obvious one that's apparent in most companies, that you have these different generational divides, and the stereotypes that are present in those conversations are very unproductive in most cases. I mentioned moving beyond binary thinking. Black and white thinking is what it's called in some research. But binary thinking is not useful in this relational era. It's very rare that something is just this or that, black or white. Like, it's just, our world is a little more complex than that, but our brains like simple solutions. So those are the narratives that our brains latch onto and in my opinion, hold too tightly. And that's what I mean by this final bullet, which is exploring those things that you're holding on to so tightly, right? Being mindful of your own biases, because our scientific research has shown if you have a brain, you have a bias. You have likely many biases that may be holding you back from making better decisions, from strengthening your relationships, and having truly healthy, functioning, collaborative workplaces. So I'm at 10:47. I'm going to do a little wrap up. The summary here, you can see these are an invitation, really more than anything, to take a look at your processes, protocols, and policies through that bias ecosystem lens, and then see what kind of updates can be made so we can get a healthier ecosystem for all of us to be working in. I really do like to focus on much of what we call compliance training is automated already. And there's some really good online check the box compliance training courses. It does what it does, which is, sort of set a baseline of what not to do. And where I think HR in a strategic function is really more focused on what to do and is taking more proactive measures for how to intentionally design workplace cultures. So I'm going to end with that to say if there are some questions. I think Clarissa is going to do a final poll, and then I saved 12 minutes for a little Q&A for those of you that want to stick around. And then I think we're doing a little bonus thing today where we're going to go into the HRCI Engage community and continue any threads of discussion that you think are most prescient and relevant right now.
We absolutely are. Matthew, thank you so much for a very engaging and insightful presentation. We appreciate it. As I said earlier, Matthew, we have HR professionals that get up early and stay up late with us to learn here at HRCI. So we have HR professionals from all over the US, but we also have HR professionals from abroad, and I'd like to recognize them. Today we have HR professionals from the Netherlands, Italy, Jamaica, Rwanda, Ghana, Spain, Kenya, Bangladesh, the British Virgin Islands, Tanzania, Nigeria, Canada, and Portugal. If I missed Malawi, I just see popped up. If I missed your country, please go ahead and put it in the chat so we can recognize you. So just a couple of thoughts and questions that I wanted to ask you. And I want to try to get to as many questions as we can in the Q&A. And we'll get to, if we don't get to all of them, how you can engage with Matthew a little bit later on. So Matthew, could you again, just so we can have some context setting, um, just make sure we are all on the same page around the definition of the human delta. Could you briefly describe that so we're all sure what we mean when you say that?
I'm happy to, Clarissa. The poll is still up. Are people still answering that? I don't want to
Oh,
distract them while
I'm
they're
so sorry. I
doing.
didn't see it on my end.
That's all right.
Okay.
There was just two things going on at one time, and I want to
Ah,
make sure that the poll gets its attention. Um, so I don't know if it's still.
We're good to move forward. The poll will stay up while you do the Q&A.
Oh,
thanks so
okay.
much, Joe. Appreciate
Thanks,
that.
Joe.
So yeah, could you redefine that for us so that we're all making sure we're understanding it the way it's intended?
The way it's intended is to give HR leaders a way to measure the gap between how work gets done and how people think work gets done.
Mm,
And I
mhm,
challenge anyone to think about your first job, second job, your current job. When you started it, you went through this thing called orientation, and you were shown this is how we do things here. And then over time, you start to realize some things don't follow that same script, right? There,
indeed.
there is a natural delta because we're human after
Mhm,
all, right?
mhm,
And a small delta is healthy, it's functional, it's great. But once it starts to get larger and larger, that's when dysfunction starts to set in the organization. There's lots of evidence of that.
mhm. There's some themes in the Q&A around HR being a strategic partner or not. This person says if HR is not being given the opportunity to act as a strategic partner, but leadership believes it is, what can HR do to be recognized as a strategic partner? It must be. And I'll also add to that, everyone, not everyone at HRCI, Alchemizing is at the same level. We have some HR practitioners at the beginning of their career, some in the middle, some very senior executives. That's one of the things that makes this community of learning so amazing. So,
Mhm.
what would you say to those of us on different parts of that career journey? How can we show up and begin to influence that strategic conversation?
Yeah, my bias is for this tool. This is why I created it. This is why I worked with people at different levels in various HR functions, different
Hmm.
size organizations. The tool itself was crowdsourced from HR professionals at different levels. So
Hmm.
there's something in there for everybody. And when we actually run it with an organization, we're going to capture at least four different types of data from the executives, from the HR team, from the managers, and from non-managers. And if a business is even more nuanced than that, we can slice and dice the data that way so
Hmm.
that we can start to get a better understanding of how wide these deltas are. In some cases, with larger organizations, you may have a big delta within the HR team itself.
Hmm. Gotcha. On one of your slides, you had the term rogue experimentation, which I really enjoyed. But on the other side, I was thinking about, and I see some comments in the chat about the whole notion of risk. Where do you go from, because we see, literature around leadership, we have to be more courageous, we have to take risks. Where does risk morph into rogue experimentation? Like what happens when we go from taking risks to rogue experimentation?
Well, that slide, the application there, the context matters. I was talking specifically about using generative AI tools.
Ah,
So that was applying the bias ecosystem to that problem.
okay. So we should not generalize those two statements to apply more broadly. It was really in the context of generative AI.
Absolutely.
Got it.
Absolutely. I would not recommend rogue experimentation, really in any kind. I mean, there's very few contexts I think that rogue experimentation is a good idea, right? You want to have a little more quality instruction, guidance for your employees, irregardless of the type of work you're doing. I think the problem with generative AI tools is that they took everybody by storm. I mean, what was it? One day, ChatGPT was the most downloaded app on the planet until DeepSeek. And so, these things, the genie is out of the bottle. And for
Indeed.
business leaders, it's much more important that you figure out what your strategy is. If you haven't done any thinking around that, it's already happening in your workplace.
Indeed. Matthew Cahill, what an amazing presentation. On behalf of all my friends and colleagues from all over the world, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you for sharing your tools with us. And you have certainly given us a lot to think about and bring back to our organizations. So everyone, keep on learning with us here at HRCI. Sign up for our newsletter if you haven't done so already. Please go to hrci.org for additional information. And I tell you every week, but you don't listen to me. I love a coupon. It's a beautiful thing. The money that you save from using this coupon code, you can invest it. Start saving for your retirement and invest in your own development. Go to HRCI's Learning Center. Use our coupon code to get a 20% discount off the entire Learning Center. As Matthew indicated earlier, I'm really excited because sometimes, just like today, we often run out of time to get to all of your questions. And for that, we apologize, but we want to make sure we get as much knowledge from our speakers as we can. So we'd like to extend a special invitation to you to continue the conversation in our new online community platform, HRCI Engage, and chat live with Matthew, our webinar speaker. There will be two opportunities to do this, one immediately after today's webinar and another on Tuesday, February 18th, starting at 12 noon Eastern. Please go to hrci.org/engage to get access for free. We've also dropped the link in the Zoom chat just now, and we'll have login and sign up instructions in the resources tab of the webinar. Really excited about that. And for those of you who don't have another meeting right now and have the time, we encourage you to engage. And last but not least, here's our recertification activity ID number 695131. 695131. We're going to leave this up on the screen for a few minutes. But as we remind each other every week, the work that HR does changes the world. And as Matthew talked about earlier in his presentation, the world is changing. The challenges we're facing as a community has changed. So in order to meet those challenges, number one, you got to take care of yourself. And once you do that, you can go out and make the difference that we need each and every one of you to make. So in the meantime, do that, take care of you so you can take care of others. And we'll see you next week on the next episode of Alchemizing HR Navigating What's Next. If you have time, please check out HRCI Engage. It's a magnificent tool. I'll be on there as well. But until next time, be well. Again, Matthew, with gratitude. Thank you so much for being with us today. Take care, everybody.